So last week Mariko gave a really good sort of overview of Maureen Johnson's Coverflip project, which I really like as well. I think it's a really cool initiative, and what I sort of want to talk about this week, which is one of the reasons that I really like it, is I think it really is a good way of showing the ways in which we, like, as a society, perceive like women's fiction and then men's fiction, which is really just general fiction. Because yay, male is default and gender neutral. Hooray, that's a thing that we like. What is like women's fiction and then what is like men's fiction or like everybody fiction because of the gender of the author, and how we devalue certain subjects because we think of them as being like feminine and like less worthy when they're written by female authors. Whereas the same subjects, when written about by male authors, can be seen in a totally different light and like as being like, oh, like very good quality and like serious and worthy of a lot of critical acclaim. Whereas books on the same sorts of topics, when written by a woman, are often seen as and perceived as a lot less serious and like less valuable. And I think that this Coverflip project shows this really well, because it takes like some of my favorite ones are ones that take like classic books by male authors, things like Catcher in the Rye and stuff, and redesign them as if they were written by a woman. And you can see these covers and you're like, oh yeah, like if this story or a very similar story had been written by a woman, maybe with a female protagonist, maybe even not, it would be perceived in a really different light. Like, I actually gathered some things from my bookshelf, like, as examples of this. Like, I just got like a stack of Sarah Dessen books. Sarah Dessen, like, very typical young adult author who writes a lot of books, like, seen to be aimed at teen girls. But if you look at all of her books, like, yes, they do all sort of like revolve around romance in the end, but they're all they're like coming of age stories about like self-discovery and like overcoming different obstacles in people's lives, and like some of them deal with like pretty big problems. Like they deal with like divorced parents, and one deals with like an eating disorder in the family, and like deaths in the family and different things. But because they're written by a woman, and because the protagonist is female, also probably plays into it, we get things that look like this, or that look like this, or that look like this. Whereas my best example of that could come off the top of my head of like a novel that's maybe a sort of similar sort of scenario of it's kind of a coming of age, like self-discovery story, that does, in the end, involve a romance, is the book An Abundance of Catherines by John Green. Also a really good book, but because it's written by a male author and because the protagonist is male rather than female, we see it as, it's not a book that anyone would be embarrassed to see reading, whereas a lot of people would be embarrassed to be seen reading this. And I think that's sad, and it's sad that we have such of a filter on this. And then my last example, this is going the other way, this is John Green's most recent book, The Fault in Our Stars, like amazing book. But so this is a book, it's, again, like ends with a romance, but that's not really the core of what it's about. It's about two young teenagers battling cancer and sort of like their journey together. But if this were written by a woman, I don't think that it would look like this. And I think that you might get boys who were embarrassed to read it if it were written by a woman. Whereas because it's written by a man, even though the protagonist is female and it does end with a love story, you get something that looks like this and looks very serious and looks like capital L literature. Whereas if it were written by a woman, I don't think it would look like that. And so that's what I really like about Maureen Johnson's Coverflip project, is I think it does a really good job of showing us like the way an author's gender can really color our perception of books and our perception of subject matter also. Another example I wanted to put out of this is I think this is something that, this is like general trivia, but I think it really betrays how sad this is, how we view things through an author's gender, is Harry Potter. Like, obviously one of the most successful book series of our time. Probably everyone's noticed that on all of her covers, Joanne Rowling, who's the author, her name is always written as J.K. Rowling. And it's written like that because when she was first being published, her publisher was like, I don't think boys will read this if they know it's written by a woman, so you're just going to use your initials. And I think that's so sad. And maybe it's true. Like, we don't know because she never did publish under her full name. But it's sad that we think that the same story, the exact same story, would have less value, would be perceived to have less value if it were written by a woman. And so that is, I think, something that this Coverflip project really brings to light, and which I really love about it. And I think that's something that's interesting to think about. So even if you don't want to engage in the artistic portion of the Coverflip thing, I think it's interesting to look through your bookshelf and just examine different things and see, like, oh, how would perception of this change if it were written by an author of a different gender? Or, or what would this look like? Yeah, so those are my thoughts on the Coverflip project. I hope that it was maybe interesting for you. Thank you for watching, and Rinko, I'll see you on Tuesday. Everyone else, I'll see you next week.